Do you remember those fads from the 70s? The ones so wild they'd shock people today? These quirky trends filled living rooms, schoolyards, and even family cars, shaping everyday life in ways that now feel almost unbelievable. Looking back, do we laugh at them or wonder what they say about us? Smiley face mania was not just a passing trend in the 1970s. It was everywhere you looked. That bright yellow grin with the simple black eyes and curved smile was plastered on t-shirts, bumper stickers, buttons, and even lunchboxes. You could not walk into a mall or gas station without spotting at least one, and many kids proudly wore them to school as if the smile itself could bring happiness. It started as a simple design but quickly became a full-on cultural obsession, representing optimism in a decade that had its fair share of ups and downs. Families embraced it because it was cheap, cheerful, and easy to spread, and companies cashed in by stamping it on nearly every product imaginable. Teachers handed out smiley stickers to reward kids, while drivers slapped them on their bumpers like a friendly wave to strangers on the highway. For some people, it was a reminder to "have a nice day," a phrase that became just as famous as the design itself. Looking back, it almost feels unbelievable how a single cartoon face became so dominant, but at the time it made perfect sense. People craved something lighthearted and simple. Today, it might seem silly that an entire country rallied around a smiley face, but in the 1970s, it was impossible to escape, and that was exactly why it mattered so much. Shrunken head kits for kids might sound like the setup to a horror movie, but in the 1970s, they were actually marketed as toys. These bizarre mail-order kits promised that children could create their very own authentic shrunken heads at home by carving apples, drying them out, and decorating them with grotesque faces. Parents bought them because they were cheap and crafty, but kids loved them because they were just creepy enough to feel rebellious. Imagine opening the box to find the tools, instructions, and paint needed to turn ordinary fruit into something that looked like it belonged in a haunted house. It was strange, unsettling, and completely normal for its time. The popularity of these kits showed how different attitudes were back then toward what was appropriate for children. In hindsight, it is shocking that parents encouraged their kids to spend afternoons making decayed-looking heads for fun, but at the time, it was advertised as creative play. Friends would compare their shrunken apple heads like trophies, showing off whose looked scariest or most realistic. While it might seem dark now, back then it was simply another quirky 1970s fad that got kids off the couch and into hands-on entertainment. Custom van murals turned parking lots into art shows in the 1970s. It was not enough just to own a van. You had to decorate it with bold, hand-painted artwork that often featured wizards, dragons, sunsets, or cosmic landscapes. These rolling canvases reflected the era's obsession with individuality and freedom, with many owners seeing their vans as an extension of their personality. Pulling up at a concert or beach with a van covered in a dramatic mural instantly made you stand out. Artists made entire businesses out of customizing vehicles, and some designs became so elaborate that they looked like something from an album cover. Inside, the vans were often just as wild, with shag carpeting, curtains, and even small bars, completing the feeling that the van was both transportation and lifestyle. Parents might have shaken their heads, but young adults embraced it as part of the decade's adventurous spirit. For many, a van mural was not just decoration, but a declaration of independence and style. Today, seeing a van with a hand-painted wizard on the side might feel like a joke, but in the 1970s it was taken seriously and admired. It was an art form that drove down the street, bold and unapologetic. Polyester jumpsuits promised to make fashion easier, but ended up being one of the strangest clothing fads of the 1970s. These shiny, brightly colored one-pieces were marketed as the ultimate convenience. You did not have to match tops and bottoms because it was all one outfit. They looked futuristic and sleek on mannequins, but in reality, they were hot, uncomfortable, and prone to showing every bead of sweat. Still, people embraced them for nights out, discos, and parties, where the glossy fabric reflected the light and added to the spectacle. Men and women alike wore them in bold shades of red, blue, or metallic silver, often paired with oversized collars and chunky belts. The style fit perfectly with the decade's love of daring experimentation, but it also came with plenty of regrets. Sitting down was awkward, zippers often broke, and laundering polyester was a challenge of its own. Despite their flaws, these jumpsuits became a symbol of 1970s fashion excess, loud, flashy, and impossible to ignore. Looking back today, it is hard not to laugh at how impractical they were, but at the time they were considered stylish and modern. Furry toilet covers might be one of the most baffling home decor choices of the 1970s. Bathrooms across America were suddenly filled with plush covers for toilet lids, tank tops, and even matching rugs. The idea was to make bathrooms look more comfortable and coordinated, but in reality, it created spaces that seemed more like living rooms than washrooms. The fuzzy fabric absorbed moisture and odors, making them impractical and unsanitary. Yet, stores sold them in every shade imaginable: mustard yellow, avocado green, or bright orange to match the era's color schemes. Guests were expected to admire the cozy look, even if they wondered why anyone would want fur on a toilet. It was part of a larger trend of turning every corner of the house into a showcase of style, even the bathroom. Today, the idea seems almost comical, but in the 1970s, furry toilet covers were considered the height of home fashion. They perfectly capture how the decade embraced bold decor choices, no matter how strange they seem now. Beanbag chairs were the ultimate 1970s rec room accessory. Made from vinyl or fabric and filled with tiny foam beads, they promised comfort and a casual vibe that fit perfectly with the decade's laid-back style. In reality, sitting in one often felt like sinking into quicksand, and standing up was just as difficult. Kids loved them because they were colorful and fun, while parents saw them as affordable alternatives to bulky furniture. Friends would flop into them during movie nights or gaming sessions, sinking down until they practically disappeared. They were sold in every bold shade imaginable, from bright red to lime green, and instantly made any room feel more modern. Despite their impracticality, beanbag chairs were hugely popular, especially among teenagers. They reflected the 1970s idea that comfort and fun could outweigh function. Today, they are seen as retro novelties, but back then they were everywhere, a staple of suburban basements and college dorms. Disco floor tiles in homes brought the nightclub directly into suburban basements. Inspired by Saturday Night Fever, people installed light-up dance floors that glowed in multiple colors as music played. Families turned their rec rooms into mini discos, complete with mirrored balls and loud stereos. Parents and kids alike danced under flashing lights, imagining they were at the hottest club in town. These installations were not cheap, but for those who could afford them, they became a status symbol of the era. Parties at houses with disco floors were legendary, with neighbors piling in to experience the spectacle. It was a fad that perfectly captured the spirit of the decade: fun, flashy, and over the top. Today, it seems absurd to turn your basement into a nightclub, but in the 1970s, it was considered the height of cool. Disco tiles in homes remain one of the wildest examples of how far people were willing to go to embrace a trend. Watermelon helmets at sporting events were as ridiculous as they sound, yet they became a short-lived fad in the 1970s. Fans would carve out actual watermelons, scoop out the fruit, and wear the hollow shells on their heads to cheer for their teams. The sticky mess and heavy weight did not matter. It was all about standing out and showing loyalty. Entire sections of stadiums glowed green with fans wearing matching watermelon helmets, creating a spectacle that cameras loved to pan across. It was silly, impractical, and surprisingly popular for a time. Parents even joined in, turning games into family events with everyone donning a melon. Looking back, it is hard to imagine anyone wanting to wear fruit on their head, but in the 1970s, it felt like a harmless way to have fun. The fad eventually disappeared, but not before leaving behind plenty of sticky memories and photographs that seem almost unbelievable today. Roller skating waitresses were a mix of entertainment and danger that defined drive-ins in the 1970s. Servers delivered burgers, fries, and milkshakes on skates, weaving between cars with trays balanced in their hands. For customers, it added excitement to the dining experience, turning a simple meal into a show. For the waitresses, it was hard work that required balance, speed, and a lot of courage. Restaurants advertised it as part of their charm, and many families chose specific drive-ins just to see the skating servers in action. Accidents happened, of course, spilled drinks, dropped plates, and the occasional fall. But that was part of the spectacle. Roller skating waitresses fit perfectly with the decades' love of novelty and performance. Today, it seems risky to combine fast food with skates, but in the 1970s it was considered cutting edge. They captured the energy of the era and remain one of its most colorful and surprising fads. Knit beer can hats were one of the strangest fashion crafts of the 1970s. People collected empty aluminum beer cans, cut off the tops and bottoms, and crocheted them into caps using colorful yarn. The result was a shiny, clunky headpiece that combined recycling with style. Craft fairs and hobby magazines encouraged the trend, framing it as both thrifty and creative. Friends exchanged them as gifts, and some even wore them proudly to parties or barbecues. They were heavy, awkward, and uncomfortable, but they symbolized the do-it-yourself spirit of the decade. Kids often helped parents save cans, turning the whole process into a family project. Today, the idea of wearing a hat made from beer cans seems laughable, but in the 1970s it was considered clever. Knit beer can hats stand as proof that the decade embraced fads that blended creativity with absurdity. Novelty telephones were one of the most playful and surprising home decor fads of the 1970s. Ordinary phones were not enough anymore. People wanted something that matched the mood of the decade, something bold and loud even when it just sat on the table. Suddenly, phones were shaped like giant pairs of lips, Mickey Mouse standing tall with the receiver in his hand, or even footballs that rang with the same shrill tone but looked like a piece of pop art. Every call became a little event, with guests laughing when they noticed the odd design and kids begging to answer just for the thrill of holding a cartoon character to their ear. These phones were more expensive than standard models, but families splurged because they were conversation pieces that made a statement. They fit perfectly with a culture that wanted every corner of the home to feel unique and expressive. Parents thought they were fun. Teenagers used them as status symbols, and children adored them as toys they were actually allowed to use. The novelty phone craze turned a dull utility into something fashionable, even glamorous, and for a few years it seemed like every household had at least one. Looking back today, it is almost shocking how much people were willing to spend just to have Mickey Mouse hold their phone for them. But in the 1970s, when style mattered as much as function, a novelty telephone was more than a fad. It was proof that even the smallest part of daily life could be made colorful, silly, and unforgettable. Pet turtles in plastic lagoons were marketed to kids as the perfect beginner pets, but they turned out to be one of the strangest fads of the 1970s. The typical setup came in a shallow plastic dish shaped like a kidney bean, with a tiny island in the middle and a fake plastic palm tree stuck in the sand. Kids would get their baby turtles from toy stores, fairs, or even mail-order kits and drop them into these miniature lagoons to swim in circles all day. Parents were told they were easy to care for, needing just a sprinkle of food and a little fresh water. But in reality, the lagoons were far from suitable homes. Still, for children, there was something fascinating about watching the turtles paddle and climb onto their plastic islands, pretending they lived in a tropical paradise. Many kids named them, brought them to school for show and tell, or showed them off to friends who gathered around to watch. Sadly, most of the turtles did not live long in those tiny setups, but at the time, people thought they were just another harmless toy. The craze ended after health warnings and regulations cracked down, but for a while those little plastic lagoons with their palm tree centerpieces were everywhere. It is almost unbelievable today that turtles were treated like toys, sold next to action figures and dolls, but in the 1970s they were a fad that left behind both fond memories and cautionary tales. Mood lighting with colored bulbs was one of the easiest and cheapest ways to transform a room in the 1970s. and people embraced it with full enthusiasm. Bedrooms glowed with red, blue, or purple light, instantly turning an ordinary space into a groovy hideout that felt both mysterious and dramatic. Teenagers in particular loved screwing in colored bulbs to set the mood for parties, homework sessions, or just listening to records with friends. Adults experimented too, using them in dens, living rooms, or even kitchens to give their homes a futuristic or exotic vibe. The appeal was partly practical. They were inexpensive and widely available, but also tied to the decade's fascination with self-expression and atmosphere. A simple red light bulb could turn a plain basement into a disco-ready hangout, while a blue bulb gave a bedroom a cool, dreamy glow. Families who could not afford lavish decor still found ways to make their homes stand out with these cheap but striking touches. Parents might have rolled their eyes, but they tolerated it, knowing it was harmless fun that gave kids a sense of independence over their spaces. Looking back, it seems funny that something as simple as a colored light bulb was enough to change the entire mood of a room. But in a decade obsessed with personal style, mood lighting captured the desire to live in spaces that looked as unique and expressive as the people inside them. Streaked tube socks were the unofficial uniform of the 1970s, especially for kids and teenagers. These knee-high socks came in plain white with bold colored stripes wrapped around the top: red, blue, yellow, green, and they were paired with everything from shorts to sneakers to roller skates. It was almost impossible to find a school gym class or playground without dozens of pairs pulled high and proudly on display. They were comfortable, stretchy, and cheap enough that families could buy multiple pairs without a second thought. More than that, though, they became part of the fashion of the time, a way for kids to feel sporty, trendy, and connected to the culture around them. Athletes wore them, television stars wore them, and soon everyone else did too. Parents stocked drawers full of striped socks, while kids begged for their favorite color combinations. They were more than just socks. They were accessories that added personality to even the plainest outfits. Today, they might look goofy or over the top, but in the 1970s, striped tube socks were as essential as sneakers themselves. It is shocking to realize how something so simple could become such a defining piece of fashion, but that is exactly what made them unforgettable. Plaid couch living rooms were practically a hallmark of American homes in the 1970s. Families everywhere seemed to own sofas covered in loud patterns of brown, mustard, and orange plaid, often paired with equally bold carpeting and wood-paneled walls. These couches were built to last, heavy and nearly indestructible, but their designs were anything but subtle. Parents bought them because they matched the warm, earthy palettes of the decade and could withstand kids, pets, and endless visitors. They dominated the living room, becoming the centerpiece of family gatherings, television nights, and holiday photos. The fabric was scratchy, the colors clashed with everything, and yet they were everywhere. Many kids can still picture the feel of lying across one while watching Saturday cartoons or fighting for space with siblings during family movie nights. Looking back today, the plaid patterns feel garish and overwhelming, but at the time they were seen as stylish and practical. They captured the home decor spirit of the decade, bold, confident, and not at all concerned with how strange it might look decades later. Seeing one today feels like stepping directly back into the 1970s, a reminder of how far interior design has come. Clacker's belts were one of those short-lived fads that seemed fun at first but quickly wore out their welcome. These belts came with dangling plastic balls that smacked together with every step, jingling loudly as kids walked through school hallways or played outside. They were meant to be fashion accessories, adding flair and sound to an otherwise ordinary outfit, but in practice, they were distracting and annoying. Teachers hated them, parents grew tired of hearing them, and yet for a brief moment they were everywhere. Kids loved the noise and the attention they drew, even if it got them in trouble. The belts also broke easily, sending the plastic balls flying across rooms, which made them even more unpopular with adults. Despite their impracticality, Clacker's belts fit perfectly into the playful, over-the-top spirit of 1970s trends. They were bright, loud, and impossible to ignore, just like the decade itself. Today, it is shocking to think that entire schools tolerated kids clacking their way through the hallways, but for a little while, that was exactly what happened. Shrinky Dinks were one of the most beloved crafty fads of the 1970s, giving kids the chance to create their own toys and trinkets. These sheets of thin plastic could be drawn on, cut out, and then baked in the oven, where they would magically shrink into hard, colorful charms. Kids made keychains, jewelry, ornaments, or just little decorations to trade with friends. Parents liked them because they were inexpensive, creative, and relatively harmless, and they quickly became a staple at birthday parties and schoolcraft sessions. Watching your design curl up and shrink inside the oven window was half the fun. It felt like science and art all rolled into one. Kids proudly displayed their creations or gave them away as gifts, and entire collections of Shrinky Dinks filled pencil cases and dresser drawers. The fad encouraged creativity in an era when toys were often mass-produced and impersonal. Today, the idea of baking plastic in the oven might raise some eyebrows, but back then it was considered safe, educational, and endlessly entertaining. Shrinky Dinks proved that sometimes the simplest ideas could become the most magical memories of childhood. Smorgasbord restaurants promised variety and indulgence, and in the 1970s they became wildly popular. These all-you-can-eat buffets were marketed as exotic dining adventures, offering dishes from around the world alongside traditional comfort foods. Families piled their trays high with everything from meatloaf to Swedish meatballs, often mixing flavors that never should have shared a plate. For parents, it was a budget-friendly way to feed everyone, while kids loved the freedom of choosing whatever caught their eye. Smorgasbords turned dinner into an event, with tables groaning under endless pans of steaming food and desserts displayed like treasures. They reflected the decade's fascination with abundance, variety, and new experiences, even if the quality did not always match the quantity. Looking back, it is almost shocking how much food was wasted, with plates stacked high and half-eaten. Still, they were popular destinations for birthdays, family outings, and even date nights. Today's buffets may feel different, but the smorgasbord craze of the 1970s showed just how much Americans were drawn to the idea of endless choice and indulgence, no matter how strange the combinations turned out. Car window louvers looked futuristic in the 1970s, but in practice they created more problems than they solved. These shutter-like shades were installed over the rear windows of cars, meant to block sunlight and give vehicles a sporty, space-age look. They were popular among young drivers who wanted their cars to stand out in parking lots and cruising strips. The louvers did give cars a distinctive style, but they also trapped heat, rattled at high speeds, and made rear visibility difficult. Parents rolled their eyes, but teenagers embraced them as part of customizing their cars, often pairing them with flashy paint jobs or racing stripes. Auto shops advertised them heavily, and magazines praised them as the next big thing in car accessories. Looking back today, it is surprising that people tolerated how impractical they were, all for the sake of style. But in the 1970s, car culture was all about expression and appearance, and louvers fit right into that mindset. They remain one of the clearest examples of how aesthetics often outweighed common sense in the fads of the decade. Watermelon seed spitting contests were treated like championship events in the 1970s, especially at fairs, picnics, and backyard gatherings. The rules were simple: eat a slice of watermelon, line up, and see who could spit the seeds the farthest. Kids and adults alike joined in, measuring distances in the grass and laughing as seeds flew in every direction. Some communities even organized formal contests with prizes, making the whole activity feel like a real sport. Families practiced in their backyards, and children bragged about their longest spits to friends at school. It was silly, messy, and surprisingly competitive, the kind of carefree fun that defined the decade. Looking back today, it seems bizarre that people spent afternoons spitting fruit seeds for entertainment, but at the time it was a beloved pastime. The contests captured the simple joys of summer, turning something as ordinary as eating watermelon into a shared memory and a point of pride. While the fad eventually faded, the image of kids lined up with watermelon slices and sticky faces remains one of the quirkiest and most nostalgic fads of the 1970s. Wham-O Frisbee dog shows were one of the most unexpected spectacles to rise out of the 1970s, transforming a simple beach toy into a full-blown cultural craze. Frisbees had already become popular with kids and college students in the decade before, but the idea of training dogs to leap into the air and catch them turned casual play into entertainment worthy of national attention. These shows started small, often as halftime stunts at local football games or fairs, but they quickly became a phenomenon. The dogs, usually athletic breeds like border collies or retrievers, would sprint across the field and launch themselves high into the air, catching frisbees with jaw-snapping precision. Crowds went wild, clapping and cheering not just for the pets, but for the sheer creativity of turning a toy into a sport. Wham-O capitalized on the excitement by sponsoring contests, releasing promotional ads, and cementing the Frisbee's image as more than just a backyard pastime. Families bought Frisbees not just for themselves, but specifically to train their dogs, inspired by the shows they had seen on television or in stadiums. It was quirky, wholesome, and yet shocking to see how quickly something as ordinary as a flying disc could reshape pop culture. Today, Frisbee dog competitions still exist, but in the 1970s they were new, novel, and captivating, showing just how far Americans would go to turn fun into spectacle. Big hair dryers with bonnet hoods were a staple of home beauty routines in the 1970s, and using one made you look like you were about to launch into space. These machines came with large plastic hoods attached to a flexible hose that pumped out warm air, enveloping the head like a bubble. Women would sit for what felt like hours under the bonnet, magazines in hand, waiting for their curls or rollers to set. The appeal was that you could achieve salon-style results at home without paying for weekly appointments, something that appealed to housewives and teenagers alike. The sound of the motor was loud, the air often uncomfortably hot, and moving around was nearly impossible, but the trade-off was considered worth it. Kids would peek into the bathroom and giggle at their mothers looking like astronauts, while some women even fell asleep under the warm hum. Advertisements promised glamour and ease, framing the bonnet dryer as a must-have for every household. They were often stored in closets, lugged out on hair wash days, and treated with a mix of frustration and affection. Today, it is surprising to think how much time and patience went into simply drying hair, especially compared to modern handheld dryers. But in the 1970s, the bonnet dryer was a symbol of domestic beauty culture, part appliance, part ritual, and a reminder of how style required both dedication and endurance. Marble contact paper was the budget decorator's dream of the 1970s, a roll of sticky vinyl that promised to transform any surface into something resembling polished stone. Kitchens, bathrooms, and even living room furniture became targets for this inexpensive makeover trend. Counters were covered in faux marble swirls, tabletops got their glossy coats, and cabinets suddenly looked like they belonged in a mansion, at least from a distance. Families who could not afford real marble embraced it as a way to elevate their homes without breaking the bank. The process was messy, though, with bubbles forming under the sticky surface and corners peeling up after a few weeks. Kids often joined in, helping parents smooth down the rolls with rulers or spatulas, turning it into a weekend project. Guests pretended to be impressed, even as they noticed the seams or wrinkles that betrayed the illusion. Still, for many, marble contact paper was an easy and fun way to keep up with the bold decor spirit of the 1970s. It fit perfectly with the era's love of synthetic solutions, where practicality often gave way to appearances. Looking back today, it is both amusing and shocking to see how proudly families displayed their marble counters, as if sticky vinyl could transform a home into something glamorous. But at the time, it was affordable luxury, and no one questioned it. Tie-dye everything captured the rebellious, colorful energy of the 1970s, splashing psychedelic swirls onto clothes, curtains, and even bedsheets. Born from the counterculture of the late 1960s, the fad carried into the next decade with full force, becoming more mainstream as department stores sold ready-made tie-dye alongside home kits. Teenagers dunked plain white shirts in buckets of dye, twisted and rubber-banded into patterns that felt like art projects and self-expression rolled into one. Every piece was unique, bold, and impossible to ignore. Parents tolerated the mess of dye-stained sinks and hands because they knew it kept kids entertained and engaged. Tie-dye represented freedom, individuality, and a refusal to conform, all values deeply tied to the youth culture of the time. But it was not just limited to shirts. Curtains, tablecloths, and even jeans were transformed into kaleidoscopes of color. Concert crowds became seas of tie-dye, and even celebrities embraced the fad, further cementing its popularity. Today, it might seem shocking how fully the aesthetic took over, making it difficult to find a space untouched by swirls of neon. For those who lived through it, though, tie-dye was less about fashion and more about identity, a colorful rebellion against blandness that defined an entire era. Giant foam fingers at games were one of the quirkiest but most enduring fads to come out of the 1970s. Stadiums suddenly filled with fans waving oversized hands emblazoned with the words, "We're number one." The foam fingers were clumsy, awkward, and impossible to ignore, turning entire crowds into seas of waving symbols of loyalty. Parents bought them for kids who proudly thrust them into the air during baseball, football, and basketball games. Vendors sold them at stadium entrances, and soon they became must-have souvenirs for anyone attending live sports. Fans loved the way they made them feel part of something bigger, a simple foam prop turning cheers into visual waves of support. They were also surprisingly expensive for what they were, but no one cared. Being part of the craze was worth the price. Photographers and television cameras captured the fingers, and within a few years they became inseparable from the sports experience. Looking back, it is shocking how quickly a novelty item became a symbol of fandom, one that survives even today. The foam finger began as a playful fad, but ended as a permanent piece of American sports culture, proof that sometimes the silliest ideas have the longest legacies. So which of these 1970s fads would shock you the most if they came back? There was a time when men's fashion turned into a pastel explosion. Inspired by Miami Vice, pastel blazers became the go-to power move for any guy who wanted to look cool, sophisticated, and vaguely like he sold luxury boats. The look was unmistakable. Shoulder-padded jackets in baby blue, mint green, or pale pink, paired with white pants and an attitude. You rolled up the sleeves. You wore it over a t-shirt. Bonus points if you wore loafers with no socks. It was supposed to say, confident renegade. More often, it said, confused ice cream vendor. It was television fantasy brought into everyday wardrobes, and it did not always survive the transition. Most men were not undercover detectives in Miami. They were accountants in Michigan. The style clashed with the office cubicles and suburban backyards where it showed up. And once the show faded from prime time, so did the look. The pastel blazer became fashion's forgotten relic. But if you thought that was an eyesore, wait until you see the avalanche of snot, slime, and absurdity that came from the most chaotic merchandise blitz of the 1980s. Garbage Pail Kids were just getting started. The first time someone saw a beanbag chair, they probably thought it was a deflated pillow with no purpose. No back support, no legs, no structure. Just a blob of squishy fabric filled with tiny beads, sitting there like a mistake someone forgot to throw out. But then, someone sat in it, and everything changed. Beanbag chairs did not care about proper posture or furniture rules. They molded to you. They embraced you like a soft, shapeless hug that said, "You do not have to sit like an adult right now." Kids loved them. Teenagers made them their throne. College dorm rooms practically built their entire identities around them. You could throw one into a corner, and suddenly it was the coolest seat in the house. And that was the thing. What seemed lazy and sloppy turned out to be genius. It was comfort without apology, a rebellion against stiff couches and uptight dinner chairs. Beanbag chairs became the symbol of do your own thing in a decade that desperately needed that message. The 1970s were messy, unpredictable, and loud. And so were these chairs. They belonged. They fit right in. And even if adults scoffed at them, they eventually sat down. And once they did, they stayed. The O'Keefe and Merritt Aristocrat range was not just a stove, it was a throne. Towering over every other appliance in the room, this 734-pound marvel was the ultimate status symbol in post-war kitchens. It did not whisper innovation, it shouted it. With twin ovens, broilers, warming drawers, and a built-in timer clock, it looked like something from a science fiction movie, only real. Housewives of the 1940s and 1950s dreamed of owning one. Advertisements called it the Cadillac of kitchen ranges, and they were not exaggerating. You could roast a turkey, bake a pie, broil steaks, and warm dinner rolls at the same time. It was massive, yes, but that size came with function. Wide enamel cooktops offered space for every pot and pan. The dials were thick, confident, and satisfying to turn. It felt like driving a classic car, slow, powerful, and designed to last forever. But time moves fast. Kitchens shrank, stainless steel arrived, and the Aristocrat, once a dream, became too heavy, too large, too old-fashioned. Most were discarded during remodels, sold for scrap or left in garages like relics from a forgotten empire. But ask anyone who grew up with one, and they will tell you that stove made cooking feel like a ceremony. When did we decide that smaller meant better? Roller rink socials were where friendships formed, crushes blossomed, and fashion collided with fluorescent lighting. Every weekend, kids flocked to the local rink like it was the hottest club in town. You laced up rental skates that never quite fit, wobbled onto the floor, and tried not to fall in front of your classmates. The music blared, everything from Madonna to Michael Jackson, and the lights spun in pinks, blues, and greens. Couples held hands during the slow skate. Kids showed off their best moves during the speed rounds. And when you got tired, you grabbed a slice of cardboard-flavored pizza or a snow cone that turned your tongue electric blue. The carpet was hideous, the lockers never worked, but the vibe? Unbeatable. Roller rinks were more than entertainment. They were a rite of passage. You had your first dance there, your first bruise, maybe even your first kiss, awkward and giggly behind the concession stand. Parents watched from the sidelines or dropped you off with a reminder to call from the payphone. The rink was loud, sticky, and chaotic, and yet it was magic. Even now, the smell of rental skates and popcorn grease brings it all back in one wheeled rush. You knew a kid was cool if their necklace made noise from down the hallway. Enter the plastic charm necklace. These things were a fashion statement and a choking hazard all rolled into one. A long, brightly colored chain that you decked out with dozens of plastic trinkets. Mini roller skates, tiny telephones, hair dryers, soda bottles, and anything else the size of your thumb. The more charms, the better. It was like curating your own loud, clunky resume of childhood interests. Everyone traded them. Everyone bragged about having the rare ones. And of course, the plastic was cheap enough to snap if you breathed on it wrong. Teachers hated them. Parents hated stepping on them. But kids loved how collectible they felt. That is, until the day you leaned over your desk and your entire charm empire dumped itself on the floor like a sad little toy avalanche. Still, for a while, they were the perfect combination of fashion and fun. And speaking of things that looked fun but failed to function properly, do you remember the sweet-smelling school supply that never actually worked? Let us talk about rubber-scented erasers shaped like food. They were weird. That was everyone's first thought. Foam platform flip-flops looked like someone glued a shower sponge to a sandal and called it fashion. But once you tried them on, something clicked. Literally and emotionally. The soft, bouncy soles made every step feel like you were walking on marshmallows. Suddenly, you were 2 inches taller and twice as confident. And for many, that was enough. At first, they were beachwear. An odd novelty you picked up on vacation and wore as a joke, but then summer came around, and people started wearing them. Everywhere. To school, to the mall, to concerts, the foam base had just enough squish to feel like rebellion, just enough weird to make you stand out. And that mattered. Everyone wanted to be taller without looking like they tried. Everyone wanted comfort without giving up edge. These flip-flops were not exactly safe, They wobbled, they tipped, they tripped you up sometimes. But that was part of the charm. They were unstable in all the ways the 1970s were: loud, strange, somehow graceful. And if you managed to master the art of walking in them, you earned more than height, you earned style points. The Teasmade was not just a novelty. It was a revolution in how mornings began. A combination alarm clock and tea maker, it became a fixture in British bedrooms and a curious but beloved import in mid-century American homes. Imagine waking to the gentle hiss of boiling water, the soft clink of porcelain, and the smell of fresh brewed tea wafting through the air before your feet ever touched the floor. The Teasmade delivered this magic through simple but elegant engineering. A timer triggered the kettle. A mechanical arm poured the boiling water into a waiting teacup. No fumbling in the kitchen, no slamming drawers, just warmth and calm. Some models even included a gentle nightlight, glowing softly on your bedside table like a companion. It turned mornings into rituals. But rituals are easy to break. Coffee took over. Digital clocks became the norm. And the quiet grace of the Teasmade was forgotten. Now it exists mostly in memories and dusty attics. But for those who used one, the association is immediate. Peace, intention. A morning that cared for you instead of demanded something from you. When did we trade thoughtful awakenings for jarring alarms and paper cups? Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn. If it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends, you collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. The Trapper Keeper was not just a binder, it was a lifestyle. This glorious slab of plastic with vibrant covers, think unicorns, neon grids, or random geometric chaos, was the crown jewel of any school supply list in the 1980s. But what really made it iconic? That Velcro closure. The loud, slow rip of peeling open your binder was like a thunderclap in homeroom. One kid opened theirs? Fine. 20 kids did it at once? It sounded like the floor was being ripped up. Teachers hated it. Students loved it. The inside was perfectly organized with color-coded folders, pockets for notes, and room for a calculator or 3-scented pens. But the noise? That was the deal breaker. Eventually, some schools banned them altogether, citing disruption of learning, which is code for "this binder is louder than the morning announcements." But let us be honest, part of the appeal was the noise. It said, "I am prepared and I am here to cause mild chaos." The Trapper Keeper burned bright, and then it was gone. But if you were not cradling one of these masterpieces, you were probably outside spinning on something equally unnecessary and questionably effective. Let us talk about the portable dance revolution that was basically just fancy cardboard. The Coldspot refrigerator was not just an appliance, it was the promise of a modern American life, humming quietly behind a steel door. Born in 1928 and sold by Sears for nearly 50 years, it was as dependable as it was beautiful. But in 1935, the Coldspot became something extraordinary. That year, legendary designer Raymond Loewy transformed it into a sleek, curved monument to the future. Gone were the clunky bolts and exposed hinges. In their place, smooth lines, minimal handles, and a shape that looked more like a Cadillac fender than a food locker. It was the first refrigerator to look good in the spotlight, not just behind the scenes. Inside, it had adjustable shelves, crisper drawers, and butter compartments, all luxuries at the time. It was quiet, reliable, and built to last for decades. Families placed cherished leftovers in its embrace. Birthday cakes, cold fried chicken, pitchers of lemonade. This was where comfort lived. And yet, the Coldspot's legacy faded as mass manufacturing favored cheaper materials and disposable models. The beauty disappeared. The silence was replaced with buzz and blinking lights, and the promise of forever was swapped for one-year warranties. When did we decide that cold convenience was more important than warm design? Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Some inventions solve problems, others create them. The television with a built-in VHS player was supposed to be the ultimate convenience. One machine, one cord, one less reason to crawl behind the entertainment center. But this Frankenstein creation was as clunky as it was cursed. The built-in player jammed constantly. Tapes got eaten, ejected halfway through, or refused to rewind. And if the television broke, say goodbye to your movie nights. Repairs were complicated and expensive. If the VHS part failed, you were stuck with a giant screen that could not play anything. If the television part failed, you had a glorified tape storage box. The worst was when you were watching something and the tape chewed itself mid-scene, turning your favorite film into spaghetti. Still, it looked high-tech at the time, and for a short while, having one meant you were fancy. But like many 1980s trends, style outpaced practicality, and homes across America quietly swapped them out for separates once again. But if you wanted to keep the glow alive without the bulk, the next trend did it in the smallest, brightest way possible. Let us talk about glowing in the dark on everything. They were wooden. They were chunky. They made a loud clomp every time you took a step. Clogs were the anti-shoe of the 1970s. And yet somehow, they became the fashion statement of the decade. At first, people mocked them. They looked like something a medieval farmer would wear, not a teenager headed to a rock concert. But fashion does not always listen to logic. Slowly, the tide shifted. Bohemian trends took over. The hippie movement gave rise to a whole new look, and clogs fit in perfectly. They were earthy, natural, different. People started pairing them with bell-bottoms and flowing skirts. Soon, what was once mocked became mandatory. Clogs also had an unexpected bonus. They were surprisingly comfortable. Once you got past the weight and the awkward shape, they molded to your foot like they were made just for you. They lasted forever. They were easy to slip on and off. And they made a sound that announced your arrival like a tiny personal drum roll. The world learned something about style in the 1970s. What feels right often looks right, even if it takes time to catch on. And clogs proved that the line between strange and stylish can be one confident step away. Jello molds were not just recipes, they were performances. In the 1950s and 1960s, these shimmering towers of gelatin were the pride of dinner tables and potlucks alike. Suspended inside were slices of fruit, vegetables, nuts, and sometimes even meats, frozen in mid-dance by the wobble of lemon or lime gelatin. The molds themselves were often metal, shaped like flowers, domes, or decorative rings. Housewives practiced their releases with reverence, praying the mold would slide out cleanly with a satisfying thwack. The result? A glossy, surreal centerpiece. Guests gasped, children poked. Recipes were passed from neighbor to neighbor, each claiming their version was best. But these creations were not just about looks. Jello was cheap, shelf-stable, and forgiving. It let families stretch their ingredients during lean times. It made leftovers glamorous, and it brought a little joy to a time when people needed something bright and strange and wonderful. Eventually, tastes changed. Molds disappeared into cabinets. Jello became a snack cup. But for decades, it was art, it was pride, and it was love in a ring-shaped dish. When did we stop celebrating the food that made us smile before it ever touched our lips? Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. If you were a kid in the 1980s, there were two ways to rebel. You could get grounded, or you could collect Garbage Pail Kids. What started as a gross-out parody of wholesome Cabbage Patch Kids quickly mutated into one of the most controversial and overstimulating franchises of the decade. The trading cards were wild enough, oozing noses, melting eyeballs, radioactive vomit. But that was just the beginning. Suddenly, they were everywhere. Garbage Pail Kids lunchboxes, bed sheets, pajamas, notebooks, puzzles, even Halloween costumes. It was like someone said, "What if childhood was more disgusting?" And the market responded, "Yes, please." Parents hated them, teachers banned them, some schools even confiscated them on site. But for kids, they were pure rebellion in sticker form. Every new pack was a gamble. Would you get Atom Bomb or Leaky Lindsay? Either way, it was peak 1980s absurdity, but the brand overdid it. What once felt underground became overexposed, and by the time the infamous Garbage Pail Kids movie dropped in theaters, it was game over. Gross became exhausting. The merch wave collapsed under its own snot-covered weight. Still, it was fun while it lasted. Now, let us talk about another trend that looked sweet and innocent, until summer arrived and your feet begged for mercy. The butter mold was once a quiet symbol of pride that lived in farmhouse kitchens and rural homes across the country. Before butter came in sticks wrapped in wax paper and stacked in supermarket coolers, it was made by hand, from cream churned for what felt like hours. But churning was only half the ritual. The real finish came when that butter, thick, golden, and soft, was pressed into a hand-carved wooden mold. These molds came in all shapes and designs: roses, wheat stalks, stars, initials. Some were simple, some were intricate, but all of them said the same thing. This was made with care. They were not just decorative, they were a mark of identity. In local markets and community fairs, families were recognized by their unique butter stamps. It was not branding, it was heritage, a kind of craftsmanship that was passed down like a recipe. Butter molds were rinsed, dried, and stored in the coolest cupboard. They were cleaned with a toothbrush, handled like treasure. Today, you will find them dusty on antique shelves, mistaken for cookie presses or quaint kitchen decor. But they were never just for show. They were the final touch to a process that took time, patience, and love. When did we stop honoring the beauty in what we used to make by hand? If the lights went out in the 1980s, chances are something in your room lit up. Glow-in-the-dark stickers were slapped on every surface known to humankind. Bedroom ceilings became constellations. Alarm clocks glowed like miniature UFOs. Light switch covers, shoelaces, trapper keepers, even toothbrushes. Nothing was safe from the radioactive green charm of phosphorescent novelty. And as a kid, it was magic. You charged them up under a lamp, turned off the lights, and suddenly your room was a planetarium. Sort of. The glow would last about 30 seconds. And then, nothing. But those 30 seconds? Pure wonder. The problem came when the adhesive gave out and the stickers peeled off, leaving weird, dusty outlines on your walls. Or when the glow effect faded completely, leaving behind little blobs of dead plastic. Still, the trend exploded. Kids wanted to glow. Toys were made with it. T-shirts were printed with it. Some even tried to make glow-in-the-dark nail polish. The 80s loved the idea of visibility, especially in the dark. But while glowing stars were subtle, the next trend was anything but. Let us talk about the fashion moment that made teenagers look like they were headed straight for the football field. Shoulder pads, anyone? There was a moment in the 1970s when you could walk into a party and see a couple wearing the exact same outfit, and somehow it worked. That was unisex fashion, a bold, strange, often mocked movement that blurred the lines between his and hers and replaced them with one loud, patterned, stretchy ours. At first, people hated it. Men in bell-sleeved shirts and wide-legged pants, women in tailored vests and matching blazers. It was confusing. It was risky. But it was also exactly what the 1970s needed. This was a time of rebellion, against war, against inequality, against the boring predictability of the decades before. Clothes were no longer just fabric, they were statements. And unisex fashion was a declaration that people could dress however they wanted and love whoever they wanted, without rules. Matching jumpsuits, his and hers flare jeans, bold stripes, earthy tones, and silky fabrics. At its peak, unisex fashion made you look twice. Not just at the outfit, but at the people wearing them. It made you ask questions. And sometimes, that discomfort turned into understanding. What started as a joke in some circles turned into a quiet revolution. Fashion was never just about looking good, it was about saying something. And in the 1970s, unisex fashion spoke loud and clear. The hand crank egg beater was a rite of passage. Long before mixers plugged into walls, children stood on stools beside their mothers, gripping the cool metal handle and turning the crank with both hands. The beaters would spin in a blur, blending sugar, eggs, and flour into the thick beginnings of birthday cakes and pancake batter. It was not efficient, but it was intimate. You felt the recipe coming together. Your arms grew sore, but your heart grew full. The egg beater did not make noise. It did not break. It did not ask for anything but effort. Every kitchen had one, usually tucked in a drawer next to the wooden spoons and measuring cups. Its clinking metal gears were as familiar as the smell of vanilla extract. And somehow, everything tasted better when it had been beaten by hand. Then came stand mixers, food processors, and digital timers. The crank beater was cast aside as outdated, inconvenient, old. But in that loss, something human disappeared. Now it hangs on antique shop walls, a symbol of effort, patience, and care. It taught us that food was not just made, it was earned. Why did we stop believing that some things are better when you feel them in your bones? Payphone predicaments were a daily part of life before everyone had a phone in their pocket. You needed a quarter, maybe two, and a working booth to make a call. No signal bars, no group texts, just a heavy receiver, a scratchy dial tone, and sometimes a sticky keypad. Finding a payphone that was not broken or graffitied felt like a small miracle. If you were lucky, it worked on the first try. If not, you banged the receiver, tried again, and hoped your coins did not disappear into the void. Making a collect call meant saying your name faster than humanly possible. "Hello, mother, please pick me up right now," before the machine cut you off. Privacy was non-existent. Everyone could hear your conversation. Rain? You ducked into the booth and hoped it did not smell like sadness and cigarette smoke. Nighttime? Good luck. The glow of the payphone sign was a lonely beacon, but it was all we had. We memorized numbers. We waited in line. We scrounged for change in pockets and glove compartments, and when the call finally went through, it felt like a victory. Payphones were clunky, inconvenient, and unreliable. But they were also our lifeline, 1 quarter at a time. Before padded gym floors and TikTok dance tutorials, there was the breakdancing board. It was exactly what it sounds like. A portable, foldable square of cardboard with a brick wall graphic or checkerboard print meant to simulate the streets. Because nothing says urban grit like unfolding a fake alleyway in your suburban driveway. These things were lightweight, glossy, and slid around on every surface. In theory, they let you spin, pop, and lock without bruising your spine on concrete. In reality, they slid out from under you mid-move, causing more scraped elbows than applause. But in the moment, they felt cool. They turned any parking lot into a stage. Throw on some Run DMC, slap that cardboard down, and suddenly you were in it. Never mind that it bent after 2 uses and warped in the rain. You were performing. You were part of something. Until the corner curled up or the board tore in half while trying to nail a backspin. But that was the 80s. Function took a backseat to flair. And speaking of flair, our next trend lets you turn every sweatshirt into a personal fashion statement or a wearable art disaster. Drop your answer in the comments. Give this video a like if it made you smile, and subscribe so we can keep rediscovering the wild side of the past together.